Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Littleton, business editor of Variety. Thank you so much for joining us today for Variety's streaming room, The Tipping Point for Connected TV Storytelling and Advertising. We have an interesting panel today of ad tech expert meets ad sales expert. So we should have a good, lively conversation about the state of the art in television advertising right now, which is, like everything else in television, changing at a rapid clip. And we have two perfect people to talk and let us know where the state of this art is moving. I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting with Krishan Bhatia, Executive Vice President of Business Operations and Strategy and Ad Sales for NBCUniversal, and Tim Sims, Chief Revenue Officer of ad tech firm The Trade Desk. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I believe we're all East Coast, although we know it's a global business now these days. Tell me, we really wanted to drill down in this panel on the impact of connected TVs, which have more than hit critical mass. The penetration rates are now significant enough to make them a real platform for marketers, for advertisers, and certainly for storytellers. Let's start by, I guess, Tim, I would just love your perspective. The Trade Desk has said that its mission is very simply to change the way advertising is bought and sold. Given the landscape that we're in and that we are seeing connected TVs and addressable advertising options grow by leaps and bounds in the last couple of years, what is this doing to the overall marketplace for television advertising?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if you look at where the Trade Desk fits into the kind of overall ecosystem, we're here to help enable data-driven advertising for brands and marketers and their agencies. And if you look at just the history or just kind of the arc of programmatic in the media landscape, it really is kind of centered on that idea, right? Which is that I'm going to use data and apply data across a wide swath of inventory everywhere in the world. A lot of times, like a part of my role is overseeing our partnerships with folks like NBCU and Krishan. And so a lot of times I look at my role in that part of the world as how do we help our clients, bring access to every impression on every screen everywhere in the world. And what that really is about the application of data so that we can make smarter decisions around media investment and media allocation. So if that's the core principle behind programmatic, then what's happening in today's landscape is that television is starting to become part of that conversation. And so what's been incredible to see over the last couple of years is television start to move in that direction. And largely that's being driven by the consumers who are moving their consumption habits into connected television platforms, into AVOD services, all so that they can watch incredible content from folks like NBCU on different types of devices and in different settings and on different delivery mechanisms. And what that means for advertisers is that they can now finally take all that data that they've been utilizing in the digital ecosystem and point it at the television screen. And that's a huge advancement and a huge opportunity moving forward for both marketers and brands, as well as content owners like NBCU.
Mm-hmm. Krishan, tell me from your side of the desk on this equation, what has the ability to bring a more focused and strategic effort to how NBCUniversal across all of your platforms, how you slice and dice what had been very broadly defined demographics based on age and gender. And I would imagine it's a whole new world now. And getting there is probably a technical challenge just even within your existing infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Tim said, from the consumer perspective with everything. And we've seen a really pivotal moment occur over the last 12 to 18 months in terms of consumers shifting to connected TV streaming platforms. Our digital video consumption, just to give some statistics, over the last year is up by more than 55%. Within that, CTV is actually up by more than double. So I do think that we're at a sort of tipping point in terms of the consumer voting with their time on digital platforms, where the convenience and the depth of content from companies like ourselves, is just a very compelling offering. And so then you marry that with the ability on those platforms by default to enable the scale of television and the quality of television with the precision of digital, which, as you said, encompasses everything from a data enablement and targeting perspective. And if you think about offerings like Peacock, which has been in the market now for the past few months, those are direct-to-consumer businesses where programmers like NBCUniversal now have a direct relationship with customers. We register them, and we're able to tailor our services, but also our advertising messages from our clients to them. That's one. Two is we're engaging with partners, distribution partners in particular, around how we create data partnerships that are at the intersection of our content offerings and their distribution platforms. And then thirdly, our partnership with Trade Desk, for example, is how do we enable programmatic sales and programmatic targeting for our brand marketers and increasingly long-tail advertisers as well in a data-enabled fashion. So you really ultimately have the best of both worlds. Again, the scale and quality of television with the precision and targeting of digital.
It's interesting because, for decades, just the fact that an NBCUniversal would want to work with an ad tech firm like a Trade Desk, for decades, advertising inventory was like, stay away, I don't want anybody else touching, this is my inventory. Every network sales executive was incredibly, sort of turf conscious, and it's just a sign of the world that we're in, that an NBCUniversal, a company like that, very long and for practically a century engaged in the business of selling advertising, is looking for new pathways to make sense of what has definitely become much more of a two-way street. I wanted to ask, it's my understanding that connected TVs really are the sweet spot because you get the most amount of data, you get the most amount of data from what a person or family is watching on that TV set, even more so than you could get from a cable set-top box, which of course that data I know was not widely shared with content owners. But am I right in thinking that there is just a gusher of information that comes through a connected TV set?
Well, for us, I think not sure that that's necessarily the case because we look at it more in terms of the totality of the consumers and households that we reach. Our one platform approach that we launched at the beginning of this year and that we've been in March actually encompasses both our traditional core television business as well as our digital and CTV business. As you referenced, Cynthia, on the core TV side, we do utilize data that's collected from set-top boxes and other devices to create an audience graph that we can then use either first-party or third-party data segments to append to and optimize linear campaigns or addressable campaigns within the traditional cable footprint. And on CTV and OTT platforms, I would say it's probably easier, like the scale of access to data is easier just because by definition, all of those platforms are digitally enabled. The ads are digitally served, in our case, through Freewheel. And so the data stream and the data density is higher. But our goal really is to have an audience graph that, quite frankly, encompasses the entire audiences that you reach and also unduplicates those households or consumers that are watching on multiple platforms. One of the things that we launched in the Front Marketplace this year was a cross-platform optimization tool that actually allows clients to build plans that run on linear platforms as well as on digital platforms, but are optimized for reach and frequency. And we're in the middle of building hundreds of plans along those lines right now. That's really been a massive ask by marketers and advertisers for the obvious reason. You want to reach the right amount of people, with the right frequency. And historically, that's been a very hard thing to solve. And if you put it through the lens of our content consumption, take any of our shows, take This Is Us or Saturday Night Live, for example, the consumption is so split between these different platforms that in order for you as a marketer to reach the full audience potential, you really have to be in all places with those consumers. This Is Us, for example, is a show that's about 42% digital now and 58% linear. SNL is kind of the reverse of that, about 60% digital and 40% linear. So if you as a marketer want to lean into either of those shows and you want the full reach of the audiences that are engaging with those shows, then our recommendation as a programmer is, let's engage with you on a cross-platform basis. We'll build you a plan that reaches the audiences that are watching it on either live, or in some cases on DVR or VOD, as well as the audiences that are engaging on CTV platforms or even short-form platforms like YouTube. And the sum total of that ultimately represents, the most effective campaign for you.
Yeah, I think this is an important place to just click in just for 1 second too, because everything Krishan said is so important to how the marketplace is going to evolve over the next couple of years, which is that if you look at this through the lens of a marketer or a brand, you're now entering into this digital world where you're spending an enormous amount of time and effort and likely money understanding your customer as a brand and a marketer. And so you're probably hiring data scientists, you're working with data management platforms and all this other stuff to understand your audience, who wants to buy my products, who's engaging with my products in various online capacities. And now for one of the first times in marketing, you can take all of that hard work and you can point it at the television screen, or you can point it at online video across the entire portfolio of incredible content like what's available through NBCU. And when you can do that holistically and bring those two worlds together, where, as Krishan pointed out, NBCU has amazing data and understanding of their audiences. Brands have an incredible, more in-depth understanding of their audiences. When you can bring those two things together, that's just an incredible opportunity to do some amazing marketing and also to continue to support the amazing content that's coming from NBCU. So I think that's the really central point to like where things are headed, is bringing those two worlds together. And the digitization of TV makes that possible against great content like SNL or This Is Us or whatever it is.
Are we moving to a place where addressable and targeted advertising can really command the kind of premiums that have that people have hoped for all these years, that you can get so specific in terms of, that 50% of your ad spend won't be wasted? Are you seeing, when you do these larger campaigns and bring in all the data and all the tools that you have now at your disposal, are you seeing a commensurate increase in the kind of premiums that sponsors are paying for this placement or for these digital campaigns? Or are we starting to see digital dollars start to offset what has been lost as linear ratings just inevitably shrink at this period? Do you understand? I mean, are we talking about replacement dollars, or are we seeing real premiums that are going to be really meaningful to an NBCU or a Disney, or one of the larger media conglomerates in the coming years?
Well, let me address the second part of your question first, because I think it's a very important one. The digitization of television content through this consumer shift to digital platforms is one that actually helps democratize access to content for consumers, but it also helps democratize access from marketers to those consumers. In a broadcast unit model where everyone is seeing the same ad at the same time, the cost of entry, for obvious reasons, is very high, because you're basically competing for marketers that are reaching consumers at scale. There's no way to break apart the unit, basically, right? Everyone is watching a linear feed at the same time. In digital, that's very different. It's an based value proposition, and therefore, through data and targeting, you can parse the impressions into different consumer segments that appeal to different marketers. So the democratization part is the fact that way more marketers, we believe, are now able to enter the premium video space in terms of getting their messages across to consumers. And so as a result, the utilization of that reach is far greater, and therefore the value creation potential is much, much greater. And a partnership with the Trade Desk, for example, is actually one major avenue of how we bring net new marketers into the fold that the traditional television business may have not been able to reach, just because its legacy infrastructure approach would have prevented that from happening.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Tim, were you going to say?
I was just going to build on that, which is that it is providing this entry point to folks that maybe hadn't run or maybe hadn't participated in the upfront process before. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because essentially what we're creating is a marketplace, right? We're creating access to the full totality of what demand there is out there. So a marketer or a brand isn't limited by the fact that like, well, gosh, I've never participated in an upfront before. Like, can I still partner with NBCU? Yep, absolutely. You do definitely can. And so those doors are open to you now, which maybe hadn't been, 5 or 6 years ago or longer. And I think that's a wonderful development because it creates a lot of ad diversity. It creates a lot of diversity of advertiser relationships with consumers and helps bring to the forefront, things like, direct to consumer brands and all this other stuff that maybe prior to this point in time hadn't really been able to leverage television as an effective medium. And now it is available to them. And I think that's a great development.
Yeah, no, we've seen a lot of coverage of how just what you discussed has allowed brands like Warby Parker and like digital native brands have more access to old-fashioned television advertising in this system. Let me ask you, how custom can it get? How custom do big marketers that want to do a cross-platform deal? Like, how narrowly defined do they want? Women between a certain age that have just bought a car, or how specific of the audience segments are you asked to go after from marketers nowadays?
It's a great question, and it really depends on the marketer category, as well as the sophistication of those marketers in understanding their existing consumers and their consumer segments that they're trying to reach. What we've found actually is that most marketers that have built significant CRM systems and have a good understanding of their customers and potential customers are the ones that are creating more refined segmentation. And in 2/3 of the case for us running data-enabled targeting campaigns, we actually custom match to marketers' CRM systems in order to activate against those segments. So in some categories, I think it's broader, but in others where there's a steady data stream from their customer bases, whether you're talking about financial services or insurance or travel or e-commerce, all the categories where you would assume that there's a tight relationship between consumer and marketer, the activation of custom segments is far greater than it has ever been.
Are you finding any commonalities between the types of audience segments that marketers are interested? I would imagine that there are still probably some sort of generally broad categories that are of interest, but then the ability to get that specific allows you to almost fine tune.
Yeah, I mean, I can take
go ahead, Tony.
Add to there, Krishan, and then you can add to it. But I think what's unique about the point in time that we're in is that if you look at the vast majority of the history of television advertising, it's been centered around two vectors basically, which is age and gender. And so now finally we can do a little bit better than that, which is really incredible because you have marketers, as Krishan pointed out, who have a really, really deep relationship with their customer and future customer and understand that at a much deeper level, and they can start to segment that audience in a way that helps them have customized conversations with the consumer. And I think that's really, really powerful. And of course, there's other different brand categories that still rely on age and gender, and it's a really effective way of marketing. But now we have the possibility to do quite a bit better. And so I think that just opens up so much for folks like us, whose job it is to help them deploy that data across the media landscape. And it's also a great opportunity for NBCU as well, because they can look at that same audience. And as Krishan pointed out, they're helping to match those audiences with the NBCU footprint. And I think those are just great avenues to do better marketing with customized messaging and all that kind of stuff. So it's really an exciting time.
Do you find that each deal is its own unique animal? Are the metrics and the guarantees and the whatever guarantees that are made as part of a larger deal, is it, Krishan, is it your experience that every deal kind of has its own standards and metrics that are important, or are you getting toward a certain uniformity within all of the diversity of addressable and targeted advertising, if that makes any sense?
No, I think it's definitely the latter, and I think that's been the beauty of the television business in the past is that it has been relatively uniform, maybe in some ways to sort of limit the potential by only focusing on age and gender, as Tim was saying. But it has created a scalable business that both buyers and sellers of media, could transact on in a relatively transparent way in terms of measuring audiences and agreeing on currency. I think what we're seeing now is definitely a diversification of measurement approaches, KPIs, and even currencies. But I would say that falls way short of every deal or every campaign being its own thing. What we're finding is as we move to an impression-based model, the impressions and how they're measured need to be agreed to. As you probably know, we rolled out a cross-platform measurement approach about 3 years now called C-Flight that equivalized television-based impressions and digital impressions by focusing sort of on the key ingredients, completed views for a digital, average minute audience for linear, for example. We didn't want to be conflated with digital ad views, that are first frame, first pixel, or 3 seconds. So our entire currency framework in digital and CTV is based on a completed view metric where a consumer is watching the entire 15 or 30-second commercial in order for it to count for currency purposes. For marketers, we think we need to continue to set a very high standard there. And then you layer onto that, once you've sort of agreed on the base currency of impression measurement, you layer onto that additional factors, like in CTV, co-viewing now is a significant unmeasured opportunity where, no surprise, just like in regular television viewing, you usually gather around a television set with multiple people in your household, whether they're families or friends, and they're usually more than one person watching at any given point in time. The same is the case for CTV, whether you're getting it through a traditional broadcast signal or you're getting it through an OTT device. Co-viewing still takes place, yet it is not fully captured yet by measurement companies that are focused on it. We're working on it, and the existing kind of measurement incumbents are working on it. But when you add co-viewing factors to CTV, the audience expands even further than what is sort of commonly known. That's another one. Then you get to the ability to measure impact through attribution and ROI metrics, which again, in a digitally measured world, you can, because you're able to run attribution pixels or focus on ROI metrics that tie back an action that a consumer took after they've been exposed to an ad. So I do think that there's still standardization required on some of those more advanced measurement and attribution metrics. Every time something new is possible, there's a diversity of innovation and players aim to fill that void. And I think that's actually a really good thing. And then over time, it usually consolidates into standards because the industry participants on both sides, want to make it as efficient as possible as well. So I think that's where we are in the journey of measurement and currency.
Yeah, I think brands and marketers they want to be having a consistent conversation when they sit down with NBCU every year, and then to the extent technology plays a role in the execution of that later on, that has to be consistent as well, so that they can do all of the things that Krishan mentioned. And so we are at this moment in time where we kind of have one foot in both worlds, where we have this tried and true world that's been measured on age and gender that everybody kind of agrees on over here. And then we're transitioning into this other thing where brands and marketers want to have this holistic conversation. It makes perfect sense, right? I mean, they want to be having a conversation with consumers where consumers are. And if those consumers are on linear, fantastic. If they're on connected television, fantastic. If they're on online video, great. But we're in this kind of one foot in both worlds right now, where we're trying to standardize across that. So that conversation, when brand XYZ sits down with NBCU for their quarterly or annual conversation, they're all speaking the same language in both of those worlds, because we have an established language over here and we just haven't quite gotten it there in the connected side. But that's essentially what we're all spending our time thinking about, is how do we create that holistic conversation, because it all ultimately just makes perfect logical sense. If you look at it just through the lens of a brand or a marketer and the lens of the consumer, it makes so much sense. And then all of us in the middle of that transaction are just trying to make it as easy and seamless as possible.
How much would you say that ROI and the definition of what the ROI metrics are going to be in a deal, how much of a focus is that in setting a large, a multi-platform or even just a targeted advertising deal? I would imagine that there would be some natural tension there in terms of how do you define what did somebody click on watching the extra long version? Did they click for more information? Did they go all the way into the car dealership and buy that car? How do you get your arms around what the deal making metrics will be in the area of ROI, which I know is hugely important to marketers, especially in the digital setting?
Well, I think ultimately ROI does come down to the be-all end metric of, how is every media dollar spent helping you drive business in terms of revenue and profits. So there are various metrics in between that many digital platforms focus on. A lot of our conversations over the last couple of years with marketers and agencies, quite frankly, have focused on how do we provide a metric that helps you determine the true impact of your business. And we launched more broadly last week something we call total investment impact, which basically measures your ability as a marketer that is partnering with NBCUniversal across many different platforms, as we're talking about, from linear to digital to CTV, to understand the total impact that investment had on your business. And so those are quite bespoke conversations at this point. They really take very sophisticated marketing and media investment teams on the client side to be able to tie it back to revenue and profit metrics of those companies. We've been working in the auto category in particular, as you mentioned, Cynthia, is one that has very, very good sales data, obviously. And so any industry category advertiser where you have good sales data that can be tied back to media exposure lends itself for building out frameworks like this. We've built an entire team around this that actually came from the Comcast marketing team. So they were media analysts that sat on the marketing side of the Comcast house, assessing and understanding and optimizing and refining Comcast's media spend in order to acquire and retain and grow their subscriber base. And we've now turned that team basically into a client-facing team that sits with our marketers and scientifically parses through how we measure every exposure and every dollar spent with NBCUniversal back to a sales impact, in terms of car sales in this case, for example. So that's really bleeding edge kind of innovation, I would say. There is no one mousetrap that for everyone, but we're investing an enormous amount of resources and talent in our data science teams and our client partnership teams, quite frankly, to be able to pull that off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's central to how I think programmatic plays a role in this too, is helping to enable everything that Krishan just said. Like if you look at it from a like, hey, I need to make my investment count, or the age-old question, like, did it work, right? And like, how do we help people gain the insights into understanding where their marketing dollar is coming down to sales, or whatever it is, whatever action it is that they're trying to drive. Could be a sign up for something, could be an in sale, whatever it is. Like we look at things in kind of a relatively straightforward way, which is that customers bring data into the platform. They help use that data to plan and understand the right ways to invest that dollar, then pushing that through to execution. And then with insights, they can understand that question, which is, did it work? And then where you're finding areas of really good return on that media investment, you continue to reinvest. And that's a really virtuous cycle of how people can start to think about the media business, because we have so many more inputs now that we haven't had before, especially in the TV investment, around all the things that you mentioned before, Cynthia, which is like, did someone ultimately go convert? Did someone engage with that ad in some way, shape, or form? Like all of these metrics are there now. And so it's about how we understand those insights so that we can continue to reinvest in the things that are providing good value. And then when you marry that with, the content quality out there in the premium ecosystem, it's a really, really virtuous cycle for marketers. And so it's all possible now. I think it's just agreeing on some of the standardization and some of the things we have to do for the next couple of years, but all of that at a base level can happen now.
Mm-hmm. I know this is my last question for you. Our time has come to an end here, but I'm curious, it sounds to me like the technology and the science behind marketing and advertising is growing by leaps and bounds. Do you feel like the storytelling, the creative aspect of advertising has kept up? We've heard for some years now that the traditional notion of the 30-second spot really needs to be reinvented. Do either of you have examples where you feel people are really on the cutting edge creatively of using the tools and the new pathways to get impressions in front of consumers?
I think it's a great question. And again, it's one that our teams are partnering with many marketers and agencies on, because it's always been the ingredient that ultimately can make a huge difference in terms of how a marketing message resonates. So one of the first things one can do is actually be able to track the impact of different creatives for any given advertiser, down to KPIs that matter. And then it's offering marketers a suite of services that allows you to actually understand how creative messaging differences may impact the overall marketing impact. I will say that on a product like Peacock, for example, where we've launched with a significantly reduced ad load versus linear, but even any other digital platform for that matter, we run no more than 5 minutes per hour and no more than 2 ads per pod. It actually allows you to measure the efficacy in a significantly more effective way than if you have a string of 10 or 12 ads running in a linear pod. So the partnerships with our launch sponsors, we have 10 launch sponsors that have been with us since we launched within the Comcast footprint in April and nationally in July. Those partnerships are yielding, I would say, the beginnings, Cynthia, of how we can partner with marketers on the creative messaging side in addition to the media science. There's a lot of work to be done there, but it requires a depth of partnership and experimentation that requires resources and time, quite frankly. But I'm optimistic that the canvas of sort of digital and OTT and CTV and kind of a restart on the consumer experience and the advertising experience will make a huge difference. I'll give one example. We launched, we have sort of a roadmap of ad product innovations that we're rolling out on Peacock over the next 12 to 18 months with these launch sponsors. One of the first ones we launched was Comcast's voice-activated remote control to be able to feature what we call on-command ads, where marketers can prompt a user to speak into their Xfinity remote and then prompt an action that could unlock a promotion or some other sort of feature that the advertiser wants to unlock. We had 2 of our launch sponsors, Unilever and Target, actually collaborate on the creative campaigns that features Unilever products, but in Target retail environments through a promotion. That's a completely new creative, basically, that we're creating at the intersection of our content offering within Peacock, our advertising expertise within our team, and 2 major marketers. And I think those are the types of things that I think will really make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is the engine of the television business, right? It is the engine behind content, and it's the engine behind advertising. There's a kind of an old joke that like nobody ever cried at a display ad, right? But television creates this opportunity for creativity that doesn't exist in any other medium, which is that you can leverage the proverbial sight, sound, and motion to really connect with the consumer. And that's now even more possible with customizations and all the data and everything we've been talking about for the last half hour, to leverage all of that information to introduce that into how you think about creative is just so important right now, because you can do that and you can have this customized conversation with the consumer, and creativity will continue to be that engine for both how advertising gets delivered and ultimately how the content's created as well. So it's a just perfect storm of opportunity.
Well, thank you. That's a perfect place to end it on. Thank you so much for talking to us and being with us to talk about the art and the state of advertising in the digital landscape. We so appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So much. Yeah.